Welcome to healthyseminars.com. I'm your moderator today. We're continuing with our series, Classical Chinese Herbal Principles in Action in Response to COVID-19. Our speaker today is Sarah Rifkin. So welcome to the room, Sarah. I'm glad to have you in. And this series has been organized by Sharon Weizenbaum. So big gratitude to Sharon. Her colleagues and students have been training with her under her graduate mentorship program, the GMP. And Sharon had this idea back in, we were chatting late March when this all went down in 2020. And she thought it'd be nice to share clinicians' experiences on how to use formulas based on presentations. And so first I'll just do our disclaimer relating to this topic, and then I'll just do a little bit more housekeeping. The disclaimer here is to let you know this is for educational purposes only. This is not medical advice. This should not be interpreted as medical advice. If you have a health condition, please seek out a healthcare provider. Again, this is not medical advice. This is educational purposes only. So I just wanted to remind you of that. And when they talk about COVID, a lot of people jump to the conclusion that, oh, these herbs treat COVID-19. And Sharon was pretty clear when she put this group together that that's not the thinking of Chinese medicine. Chinese medicine works with the individual and the individual's relationship internally and externally. And so it doesn't matter what the Western diagnosis is. It's how the individual is presenting, what their constitution is like, and that's how they're choosing the formulas to discuss. That's why there is no herb or formula for COVID-19, according to this series. You can only look at the individual and then go back to the principles of Chinese medicine to come up with your formulation. I do want to share with you our resource page. So again, it's on the home page. You can find resources anywhere. And then just to let you know that we have the calendar set up. So if you're looking for replays that usually stay up about 48 hours, or you're looking for what's coming up, you can come to this page. So here we are today with Sarah's talk. She's going to be talking about Ling Sun and Ling Tang today. And you can see we have another one on Wednesday as well. Sharon's going to be doing one on Ma Wang Lian Chao and Chi Xiao Do Tang. So very nice. And then you can see we have other stuff. Today is May 4th when we're recording this. So May the 4th be with you. It's Star Wars Day. So we got Yvonne Farrell doing a Star Wars theme talk, a throwback talk that she did in the past, where she's going to compare the archetypal energies of the Ren and Dumai by comparing it to the love stories and the parents and Luke and Leia. It's a really fun way to learn the extras. So tune in today for that one. And then we have Conscious Tuesday coming up, and we keep adding to the schedule here. So we have a few more that haven't even been added for May. And then if you're looking for some that you missed in April, please do just check. Some of them may still be available, these replays, and you click these links, they'll take you to the replay. So I just want to let you know that is all available. And so we have these resources with you. We're still running our live webinars, and we have our on-demand CEU. When I say live webinars, our CEU-approved live webinars and on-demand. And we have extended that coupon of Healthy25 until the end of May 2020. So if you're looking for anything on demand, you can use that coupon Healthy25. We'll save you 25%. And all the live webinars are discounted already under early bird rates until the end of May 2020 as well. I want to express my gratitude to my team, Sandra and Lorianne, for the amount of work that they've been doing since always, but since March 20th, we've been kind of going long days and long nights to get this material ready, and I'm very grateful for that. Our whole goal is community, hence we're here with our cameras on. At the end, we'll open up our mics and send our love and appreciation and gratitude to Sarah for putting this together. I want to express my gratitude for Sharon for all the learning that she has done, all the hours and experience she has gained, all the people she studied under, and all the translations, because she's distilled it down and created her graduate mentorship program and has trained other practitioners to raise their game, like you're seeing with all these presenters, including today, Sarah. So big gratitude, appreciation to Sharon. Sharon, do you want to do introductions and talk about some of the individual mentorship that you guys are now doing that's come out of this series?
Yeah. So, yeah, first I'll talk about the mentoring that's available on the White Pine Institute /mentoring. You can find that um, many of the practitioners who are giving lectures here are offering mentoring. So if you have any difficult cases and you want to, you know, learn from somebody with a lot of experience, you can go to that website, White Pine Institute /mentoring.org/mentoring. So, yeah, and I'm really delighted to introduce my good friend, Sarah Rivkin. I met Sarah many years ago, and then she did the graduate mentorship program, I think in 2009. And it's very interesting. I questioned to ask people, like, what did you do before Chinese medicine? And for Sarah, she was a soprano opera singer before she went into Chinese medicine, which is very interesting, very rich background in music. And now Sarah is a PhD candidate. She's getting her doctorate through the Seattle Institute of East Asian Medicine, and really learning how to translate and read Chinese. So that's very exciting. I think her focus is actually on case studies, a really interesting topic. So, yeah, so welcome, Sarah. I'm looking forward to your lecture today on Ling Tang and Chai Ping Tang. So, Wuling San. So, welcome.
Thank you. I think I'm unmuted now. Thank you, Sharon, so much for that introduction. One thing I should mention, Sharon mentioned to me, or just mentioned there, that my research is on case studies. And what she didn't mention is I really fell in love with case studies because of studying with Sharon. So I owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to you as well. And thank you, Lauren and Lorianne and Sandro for presenting me today and for all of your support, technical, emotional, spiritual, all of those good things. So just before we get started, this actually is not my picture, but it's a great picture sort of the weather we've been having in the Northeast. I'm in Brooklyn, New York. So this weekend, the sun came out and it's beautiful, and now it's spring. But prior to that, we'd been having all this rainy, misty weather. And whenever you went out in nature, the water was hanging in the air and pooling on the ground. So it seems like a perfect opportunity to talk about Wuling San. And I am sort of going to sneak in a tiny bit about Pingwei San as well, because frankly, I've had more experience using that in the context of the virus recently. And then building on what other folks have talked about in this lecture series, particularly what Suzanne Connell talked about with Xiao Chai Hu Tang. I then want to talk about these formulas as a modification of Xiao Chai Hu Tang, because I think that's probably how we're going to use them here. Okay. Oh. That is not my first slide.
Sarah, I am seeing them flip here pretty quick, so maybe just give it a second after you click it once.
Okay, great. So that is about me. That is our first slide. Okay.
Okay.
So now I have
the you're going to flip a couple more.
Where I want to be. Okay. I have to be patient.
Yeah.
I'm giving away all the answers ahead of time. Okay. So we are talking about Wuling San today. You'll see the ingredients there on the right, just as a refresher. So this is a formula to transform qi and promote the release of water when there's a dysfunction of the qi transformation. So Wuling San warms the kidneys to promote the flow of water when there is difficult urination and abdominal distension. one of my favorite teachers, Professor Liu Duzhou, groups it with Ling Tang and Wu Tang as a group of formulas to warm the yang and treat edema. So the key symptoms you're going to see here are thirst and abnormal urination. And then a slightly different phrasing of it, another one of my favorite doctors, Dr. Huang, says it unblocks the yang and expels excess water. His application is to treat diseases with symptoms of thirst, vomiting of water, diarrhea, sweating, and difficult urination. So I don't know if you can see my background image there. That's sort of a delta in the river, and it's flooded on one side and hasn't flooded on the other. So that's what we're dealing with in our own ecosystems. Okay. So references to this in the classics. In ancient times, Wuling San was used to rectify diseases with an incorrect flow of water metabolism. So this is a formula that's mentioned both in the Shanghanlun and in the Jingui Yaowei. And as you can see, so there are actually more than 4 clauses in the Shanghanlun that mention this formula, but these are the principal ones, clause 71, 72, 73, and 74. I think there are a couple others for those of you Shanghanlun trivia buffs. And then there we go. So this is sort of the highlights of what Wuling San is mentioned as doing in these clauses. So in line 71, we get that Wuling San is for a floating pulse. You're going to see difficult urination, a slight fever, and xiaoke, so the wasting and thirsting. Line 72 also mentions that this pulse might be rapid and the thirst might be excessive. In line 73, we get a little information about the timing of using Wuling San. Line 73 talks about how it's a formula to use after sweating. And line 74 talks about the thirst as being thirst specifically with a desire to drink, but the patient may vomit after drinking. Then a little further on in the text, it's mentioned for P syndrome. So epigastric fullness, in this case, due to water, which doesn't rectify itself, thirst with a dry mouth, and irritability. And then later on, it's mentioned for fever, body pain, profuse heat. In the Jingui Yaowei, it's described as being used for a floating pulse with difficult urination, a slight fever, and wasting thirst. And finally, for a thin person with throbbing below the umbilicus, vomiting, drool, and dizziness. So the next slide here, my doctoral colleague, Christina Jackson, just shared with me a translation that she's working on from a gynecology professor named Dr. Ma Zedong. And I quite liked his description of Wuling San. So I thought I might bring that in here since it's something that probably no one has seen. I mean, it's not that revelatory, but he has a slightly different way of phrasing it. So he says, Wuling San warms the yang and promotes qi transformation, having a spleen fortifying and disinhibiting water effect. It can treat when the outer body has an exterior pattern and the inner body has damp water stagnating. I probably should have made a picture for that. Perhaps there is water damp collecting internally with water swelling or diarrhea. Perhaps phlegm rheum is bringing trouble. Perhaps there is vomiting immediately after ingesting water, a water counterflow disease. Water damp phlegm rheum is a yin evil. It can stay for a long time in the human body and bring about disease. To treat congested fluids, you must warm the yang and eliminate rheum. So, I don't know how many folks out there today have treated COVID, But the patients I've seen, it takes a long time. And you're doing multiple formulas and changing the formulas and modifying it and doing different strategies. And that is very typical, right, of water pathologies, is that they can kind of, it's like if your basement is too damp, it can kind of get into everything. And it takes a while, both takes a while to get rid of it. And you might have to try a few different strategies in order to get it out of there. So we're going to take a look here at the constituents. And yes, there is a little bonus question here for anybody paying attention. I found this picture and it was so pretty and so nicely lit, but front and center, there's an herb that is not in this formula, but there you go. I think one of the best ways to understand Wuling San is to look at the constituents and to look at the interrelationships. This is a trick I learned from Sharon, right? To kind of drill down. Yes, somebody got it, E. Ren, which is great and very useful, but it's not actually in Wuling San. So I want to take a minute and look at 4 of these Dui-Yao pairs. So I want to look at Zixia and Fuling. I want to look at Fuling and Juling. I want to look at Fuling and Baiju. And I want to look at Guizhi and Fuling. So, as I mentioned, in that damp basement, right, or your yard, if it doesn't drain very well, you may have to try a few different strategies to get that water in the place that it needs to be and help the body absorb it. So in this formula, we can see that there is some draining downward, there is some guiding water upward, there is working on increasing the absorptive capacity. That's language I have borrowed lovingly from Sharon because I love that idea, like that sponge that doesn't quite have the right amount of moisture in it to start with, so it's not going to clean up your spilled coffee, right? If it's too dry or too wet, it's useless. And there is, of course, warming the yang, which I think is very important as well. So the first of these pairs I want to look at is Zixia and Fuling. To the left, I believe, if Creative Commons and Google Images did not steer me wrong, is the Zixia plant. And if you notice, see where it's growing. So it's growing by the side of a creek or a stream or a lake or what have you. Which I think is really key to a lot of what it does and a lot of what it does in combination. So when it's combined with Fuling, it treats thirst with strangury, so thirst with inhibited urination. So, kind of an interesting combination of somewhat contradictory symptoms. This combination is found in a number of formulas. And as you may recall, as I mentioned, Zixia is an aqueous tuber. So its name literally means marsh drainer. But it's interesting because, when I hear the word draining, I think of things going down, right? I think of the drain in my sink. But the way that this plant works is it actually drains the marsh by pulling the water up. If you remember from, a botany class or something at some point, they're I believe it's called the xylem, the tubes in the plants that are kind of like a straw that bring water and bring nutrients up to the leaves, up to the flowers in the plant. And so its action to do this is what helps adjust the fluid balance in the soil. And actually, Chen Shuyuan was pretty clear in his commentary on the Shangneng Bensao. He said its ability to move water in the lower body, causing it to ascend, and that it doesn't have any downward moving characteristics. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know if there's another word we should use aside from draining when something drains contrary to gravity, but definitely, that's what's going on here. So the next pair I want to look at is Fuling and Juling, which are to treat thirst with a desire for water and incontinent urination. We don't have incontinent urination in this pattern, but you may see this combination elsewhere, like you're going to see it in Juling Tong. So the Shangneng Bansao Jing mentions, I love this, that Zhuling treats malaria, resolves toxins, goo infixations, and bad luck. So I will take that. And again, Chen Shuyuan wrote that Zhuling opens the Taiyang and disinhibits the waterways. So why is opening the Taiyang important here? Remember the description of this formula, you still have an exterior condition. So the fact that this works on the fluid balance and gets the fluid circulating and also has that opening quality is very important in terms of a strategy to resolve the damp. The next one here, there we go. Fuling and Baiju. So on the right, we have not the part of Baiju that we use in this formula, but it has these pretty flowers. So I thought I would share with you the pretty flowers because it's kind of nicer to look at than a tuber. So Fuling and Baiju, one supplements while the other percolates. One is drying, the other disinhibits urination. When these two medicinals are combined together, they reinforce each other. Together, they effectively supplement the spleen and dry dampness, percolate dampness, and disinhibit urination. Or as Huang describes it, this combination treats thirst, stranguria, dizziness, and distension and fullness below the heart. And Fuling and Baiju, I mean, how many formulas is it this way out in it? You know, very, very common combination. I think these are also what Sharon would describe as chalky herbs. So they're herbs that increase the absorptive capacity. You know, the Suen says, in order for the damp qi to bring about transformation, it must settle into the earth. So this is like that first picture that I showed you, you know, with the water pooling on the road, right? It hasn't been absorbed. And so this is helping with that, with the integration and the absorption. And then Guizhi and Fuling. So typically, this combination treats palpitations below the umbilicus, palpitations below the heart, qi surging up from the lower abdomen to the chest, and qi surging trembling limbs, vomiting, and retching. So it's interesting, you know, if you've treated patients with this virus, it's really scary. And one of the reasons why it's scary is because when water is encroaching on the heart, that's terrifying. I mean, that's like triggers all the same, you know, cortisol or whatever stress responses you would have if you were drowning. You know, water is terrifying. And interestingly, I was just reading something. The CDC just added another symptom to the you know, the textbook presentation for this virus, and that was shaking. So I thought that isn't something that I've seen with the patients that I've treated or the patients I've seen. I also have been observing in my school's clinic, and I haven't seen it there either, but you know, interesting that this combination has some of that ability. You know, so there are many, many formulas, again, that this Dui Yao is found in. Whatever I think about, you know, maybe just because of the names, I always think of sort of the of Guizhi Fuling one, right? Because it's Guizhi Fuling, you know, Guizhi Fuling, which is, you know, in the Jingui Yao Rei. But in the descriptions in the Jingui Yao Rei, it talks about this Dui Yao. Both herbs enter the Taiyang and are frequently used together to promote its qi transformation, causing the clear yang and fluids to ascend throughout the body, including the blood, while draining turbidity out through the urine. So I do think, even though this combination is not ostensibly in Wuling Sun because of its action on the blood, I'm going to come back to that idea. I do think that that's an important consideration here. So Guizhi and Fuling, a little bit more, right? Healthy blood depends on healthy fluids. And particularly, in this virus, when we're all trying to think ahead a little bit and anticipate potential really scary complications, a lot of them are things that we would consider blood stasis. So I do think this idea of blood and fluids going together and keeping the fluids healthy and keeping the fluids moving is really, really important. Guizhou warms the yang, right? That's how it does this. It facilitates the movement of fluids and blood. And again, Guizhou has an affinity to the heart and nourishes the heart, blood, and capillaries. So I'm gonna spend a few minutes here talking about this relationship of fluids to blood because I think it's really, really important. So just to review here a little bit, right? Fluids and blood have a common origin. Blood and fluids are both yin substances with a close relationship. This is a quote from the classics about how fluids and blood arise together, right? You take in food that gets processed, it becomes fluids. And then in the middle jiao, the yin, the nutritive qi, secretes the jin and the ye fluids, so the thick and the thin fluids. These pour into the vessels and transform into blood, which nourishes the four limbs and internally suffuse the five zang and the six fu. So the blood comes from the fluids, right? If you're having problems in the fluids, it cannot be good for the blood. So as I mentioned, blood and fluids are both yin substances with a close, mutually influencing relationship. So, right, fluids become the blood and must be doing their physiological role to have healthy blood. Conversely, blood stagnation can obstruct the flow of the jin-ye, causing dryness or accumulation of pathological fluid, right? This relationship can go either way. Either deficiency in one can cause a problem with the other. Excess in one can likewise cause a deficiency or, a buildup, a lack of circulation in the other. Fluid deficiency or damage can cause the fluids to leave the blood, parching the blood. So fluid insufficiency or poor quality will affect the blood. And likewise, as I mentioned, an accumulation of fluids or fluids not doing their job, that's going to affect the blood. And I've had conversations with colleagues about should we prophylactically add blood movers to our formulas, just in case, just to prevent someone from getting these late stage sequelae, which, often involve blood stasis. And, after researching Wuling San and thinking about it a lot, I think the key is still to treat what we see, but to keep in mind that if we're seeing a dysfunction in the fluids, that we better address it because it could lead to problems with the blood. And I think that's where it comes from. That's my personal opinion. We can discuss that later. So remembering too that, so fluids and blood have this relationship, but also fluids and qi have this relationship, right? This is why Wuling San is such an important formula. And even more so why the principles in Wuling San are so important to remember, even if we're not actually using Wuling San. I think it's educational and illustrative of a number of fundamental ideas in our medicine that are always good things to keep in mind, right? So, here's a little quick review of yin and yang, right? Theory 101 for everybody. And then, so also stagnation of qi can go together, right? So if the qi isn't moving, we may have problems with the fluids. If the fluids aren't moving, we may have problems with the qi, right? Just the way we saw with the blood. And so another one of my favorites, Stephen Clavey, this is his description here. So he talks about how qi can transform into fluids and fluids can transform into qi. Qi's role of rising and falling, penetrating and lifting, warming, consolidating, these are all important in fluid metabolism. Deficiency of both qi and fluids is not uncommon. I would also say in the case of this formula and looking at it and thinking about when to use it, stagnation of qi and fluids is also a really important thing to keep in mind. Respiratory illnesses, when the lungs aren't functioning the way that they need to, can, very easily lead to problems with the fluids, or even just being sedentary, right? Because the lungs play such an important role in fluid metabolism, or vice versa, right? If the fluids are stuck, if they're too thick, if, they're accumulating in the wrong places, that's going to affect the lungs and the qi, just the way we saw with the blood. So, we remember from the Suen, all qi is controlled by the lungs. So the lungs control the movement and transformation of clear and murky, acting as the bagpipes of the body. This infusion of the clear qi of heaven into the gu qi creates Tong qi, so the qi that's in the chest, which infuses in the chest and provides part of the motive force for both breathing and for the movement of qi and blood throughout the channels, right? So if the fluids are stagnating and this affects the qi, or vice versa, this is the root of so many of the issues that we're seeing in this disease and, really in many pathologies. The lungs move the fluid qi through the channels to moisten and nourish tissues and organs and provide the motive force that enables murky fluids to be carried downward to the urinary bladder through the sanjiao. As an aside, apropos of how important the lungs are and the healthy function of the lungs are and their relationship to fluids, thinking about this in the context of this virus, I had a friend who was on that ship, the cruise ship that was in South America, where the governor of Florida wasn't allowing them to dock. And my friend got COVID. Oops, sorry, wasn't supposed to say it. My friend got the virus, and he's trapped in his room, and he's all by himself, and he has no resources. But he is a Broadway guy. He's an actor, singer, dancer. And for whatever reason, he had the brilliant idea to do breathing exercises. So he controlled his symptoms he was doing, like a half hour, an hour of breathing exercises multiple times a day. And he really credits his recovery with doing that. It wasn't Qigong. It wasn't anything specific. I had tried to contact him, but he didn't have much in the way of connectivity. Just keeping the lungs going prevented the fluids from accumulating, and he credits that with his recovery. So it's a good way to illustrate that relationship, I thought. So another quote from Stephen Clavey, when fluids cannot circulate and instead accumulate, they can no longer carry out their physiological functions. Now they are pathological fluids, water, damp, and phlegm. So that was my little digression into fluids and qi and fluids and blood. So I'm gonna bring this back a little bit more specifically to the topic of hand. So in the case of Wuling Sun, although the excess water may be in the urinary bladder, the cause of this is a dysfunction of the lung and the stomach, right? So when the lung can't do its job in qi transformation, then metal is unable to produce water, and water is unable to reach the urinary bladder. So this is why in this pattern we get some of these urinary symptoms as well. Because of this, the fluid pathology can really be anywhere in the body. So if we just think about this as a urinary disease, we're going to miss so many applications for this formula. So a little bit more, and these quotations are from Guo Huilu's translation and commentaries on the Shanghenlun, which if you have an extra $200 lying around, I highly recommend this book. So he's quoting a scholar there who says, thirst due to water retention in the urinary bladder is caused by the failure of qi transformation, causing the urinary bladder to be unable to steam the body fluid upward to moisten the mouth. Therefore, there must be urination problems without interior heat symptoms and signs. And scholars have proposed that the lines from the Jingui Yaorui suggest, as I mentioned before, that water retention may not be limited to the lower burner. I can show the book, or I can put it in the chat, or somebody else can. It's this one. Is that backwards on the camera? Anyway, maybe someone else can put it in the chat, or I can later. So this is just a list of possible diseases that you could treat with Wuling San, provided that the pattern fit that sort of fundamental framework. So as you can see, you pretty much have patterns involving almost every possible body system. You have diseases that are, you have GI diseases, you have diseases affecting the head, like dizziness and headaches, excessive salivation. You can have urinary symptoms, epilepsy, heart disease, vomiting during pregnancy, hepatitis, eczema, there's also research on using it for hormonal therapy side effects. So really, as I was talking about, this dysfunction in fluid metabolism just has such far-reaching implications in terms of how it can mess things up in the body. So that can mean you could use Wuling San for everything, right? Like, that list is pretty exhaustive. But, unfortunately, it's not quite that simple, right? You have to do a good intake and really get some more information. And so another quote from my buddy Steve Clavey here, the best way to gauge the state of the fluids is to examine or inquire about sweat and urination. I would also say thirst is really important too. And maybe there are a few other things we could think about. But, definitely you want to get very clear as to the pathodynamic that's going on in the body. So you want to determine the location of any accumulation of pathological fluids. As I mentioned before, you want to check, see what's up with the urination, sweating, bowels, abdomen. You probably won't get to check the abdomen right now. And then you also want to determine the state of the physiological fluids as well as any pathological fluids. So I may come back to this idea later, but generally in terms of assessing the state of urination, there are sort of three categories that this is generally put in. The first is inhibited urination. So then absolutely, go ahead, lead fluids out through the urination. With normal urination, be careful, but you probably still can do it. And if there's profuse urination, then this is probably not the strategy to employ unless you want your patient to be very angry with you. So as I mentioned, right, it's kind of, one could easily go down the garden path if you weren't quite clear about certain things like the location of the symptoms, right? Or if things like urination and thirst are primary symptoms rather than in the background. And don't forget to ask your patient about sweating, right? This is just a little table that I borrowed from a different Shanghenlun translation about differentiating Wuling San from Xiao Tang, right? And then I have another one here. She has another table differentiating Wuling San from Baihu Jiao Ren Shen Tang. right? So here the differentiation is drilling down and getting a bit more information about the thirst. And then also, too, trying to determine if they're unresolved exterior symptoms or not. We're not going to have the pulse, right? Which is a reason why the intake is really, really important. So we don't have the pulse, right? What do we have? We have our intake. And, that's a big thing we're going to have to rely on. The other thing we have is tongue, which is, if you're seeing your patients over Zoom or Doxy or Jane or what have you, the video quality isn't great, but maybe you get a good picture of the tongue, right? So you have the tongue. Unfortunately, there is no one tongue, at least I don't think so, for Wuling San, right? So again, this is from Guo Hui Liu's translation of the Shanghen Lun. He kind of goes through and talks about what some different scholars have said about the tongue presentation. So he's talking about Zhang Zhimin observed that the presentation varied. So you could have a white coating with moisture, or a pale tongue with grayish and black sticky and slippery coating, or a white coating in the center while having a yellow coating on the sides, or a red tongue tip with a white and thick tongue coating at the root of the tongue. So that's kind of exhaustive and confusing. Huang mentions that he may see a slightly red tongue, or a dull and purple tongue, a tongue coating which is often white and sticky, or watery and slippery, or a tongue body which is often swollen with tooth marks. So there's a lot to choose from there, but you're not seeing dry and you're not seeing peeled, at least, right? So I think the takeaway is you probably would want to see some signs of fluid not quite working and being absorbing the way that it should on the tongue, but depending on what else was going on for the patient and their general kind of makeup and constitution to begin with, that might be combined with a lot of different things. So here I am. I have just spent 40 minutes talking about Wuling San. And I've seen a bunch of cases of the virus, both in my own clinic. And as Sharon mentioned, I'm a doctoral student at SEAM, at the Seattle Institute of East Asian Medicine. And we have a school clinic, a virtual clinic. And I've been sitting in there. So I've been watching Craig Mitchell and Dan Bensky and Shouchen Ma treat patients, suffering from or presenting with symptoms that match the virus. I have not seen a Wuling San case. And I looked and I looked and I looked and I couldn't find one. And I wonder, to be totally honest, am I too hung up on this symptom of inhibited urination? Because that has not been a symptom that I've seen people presenting with. I've seen people certainly presenting with thirst and a lot of other things that could fit this formula pattern, but not the urination. So I don't know. I may go back and think about that a little bit. I've known this formula for 18 years, but the formula has been around for 1800 years. So I'm sure that there are some other there plenty of people have had time to comment on this formula and probably argue over this point. I think I've mostly seen this formula in combination. It is one of the constituent formulas in the Qingfei Paidu Tang, along with Ma Xing Shurgan Tang, Shurgan Ma Huang Tang, and Xiao Chai Hu Tang, which are formulas that have all been covered individually and I think also as a group. And I'm seeing so many messages here. I think maybe Sharon's answering my question here in the chat. Okay.
Is there more to go, Sarah?
Yeah. There's more to go.
I'm answering questions as they come up.
Okay, great. While I expose my ignorance to 200 of our nearest and dearest. Okay, So, Suzanne Canol had mentioned in her talk about using Xiao Chai Hu Tang for various presentations here. And chiefly, I just want to literally highlight two presentations that I, relate to Wuling San. One is Chai Ling Tang, which we're going to talk about, which is Xiao Chai Hu Tang plus Wuling San. Another one that I have seen that I may touch on for a sec at the end is Chai Ping Tang, which is Xiao Chai Hu Tang plus Ping Wei San. So here I have a picture of a water wheel here. And I want to talk for a minute about Chai Ling Tang. So Sharon mentioned, and others have mentioned, that there are these two treatment methods that we often use. One is the Cine method, which is kind of an up and out and spreading. And the other is the Chen-Chi method, which is more going down and absorbing. With this formula combination, we have some of each strategy, right? So if you understand the Shaoyang as a pivot, right, the way that we've been talking about in these lectures, it's easy to see why a dysfunction there could cause dampness or pathological water to accumulate, or conversely, why a damp accumulation could disrupt the function of the pivot. Right? So here we have our pivot, that's our Xiao Chai Hu Tang, and we have the water, that's our Wuling San. And understand if the whatever this is, if the lake or the stream is too low, the pivot might have trouble turning. Likewise, if it's too high, that might disrupt the function of the pivot. Or if the water is too silty, you've had a big rainfall and there's a lot of debris and stuff in the water that might interfere with that movement. So there really is this mutual relationship and mutual influence between these two situations. So I just wanted to illustrate that there visually for a sec. So, right, so you put Wuling San together with Xiao Chai Hu Tang and you get Chai Ling Tang, which is for a Xiao Chai Hu Tang presentation with a reduction in urinary output, edema, and thirst. There was a whole discussion that was translated with Dr. Huang that I'm not going to go into here, but I'm going to give you a couple of highlights that, he's talking about modern applications of Chai Ling Tang as being used for autoimmune diseases. And he talks about it specifically being for dry mouth or thirst, but the patient doesn't like drinking a lot of water and has diarrhea or unformed stools. So Chai Ling Tang, it's interesting, if you're someone who's interested in modern scientific research into herbal formulas, you may be able to find more if you look it up under its Japanese name, which is Saireto. My Japanese is non-existent. But it is a very widely used formula in Japan for inflammatory diseases, for things like RA and lupus, ulcerative colitis. It seems to be used kind of like a steroid. And they've done research into it. Everything in red here is a hyperlink. So there's studies on it for lymphedema, looking at its immunomodulatory effects for nephrotic syndrome, looking at it for post-operative edema as well. So I do use Wuling San a lot, but I haven't had the opportunity to use it or Chai Ling Tang, as I mentioned, specifically for the virus. But I have had the opportunity to use Chai Ping Tang, which is Xiao Chai Hu Tang plus Ping Wei San. So I thought if I had a moment just to talk about that combination as well, I would take that time. Is that okay? And I have a case for that as well.
Please.
Okay, great. And this formula I've used both in my own clinic, and I've seen my teachers in the same clinic use it as well, or use ideas of it more than Wuling San for whatever reason. So Xiao Chai Hu Tang plus Ping Wei San become Chai Ping Tang, which is to treat fever with a heavy sensation in the body and a thick, greasy tongue coating and abdominal fullness. This is a presentation that I have seen in quite a number of cases with the virus. So the herbs could not be more different than Wuling San, right? You've clearly got a very different strategy for dealing with the damp. You definitely have more acrid, bitter, warm herbs. You have chun pi in there, so you've got that aromatic quality versus Wuling San, right? Wuling San has cool, neutral, bland herbs in there, with the exception of the guizhi. Ping Wei San could probably have more thirst, but probably not as prominent. I'm sorry, Ping Wei San could have thirst. Sorry, couldn't read my own notes there, but probably not as prominent as Wuling San. And Wuling San, really the sort of bold-faced description is inhibited urination and prominent thirst. A Wuling San presentation can have sweating and probably generally more exterior signs. What is interesting, one thing that's interesting about Ping Wei San is in sort of the traditional descriptions of the formula, and I think the reason why it's getting used or why aspects of it are getting used to treat the virus is because it does have front and center this loss of taste, which is, a little bit unique in this virus. I don't know that I, have seen that a lot in other, in other presentations. It's kind of an unusual symptom. And that may be why people are using Ping Wei San, because they hear loss of taste and they think, wait, that was on my test in herbs 4 or whatever it was. That's Ping Wei San when you lose your sense of taste. So Ping Wei San also, it combines very easily with Xiao Chai Hu Tang. As you can see, you have a lot of overlap between the formulas already. Half of the formula is already there. So really, when people are talking about this combination, they usually just mean that you're adding Sangju and Herbal to Xiao Chai Hu Tang. So I am going to share with you a Chai Ping Tang case that I had. And, it's always a great exercise to write up your cases. You always see the things that you glossed over, or the limitations in your thinking, or the signs and symptoms that got swept under the rug. So I share this here not because it's a perfect case. And my patient did get better, so probably I was doing some things right. But, it does at least fit a lot of Chai Ping Tang. So this patient was a 51-year-old female, and I first saw her back at the beginning of April. Already at that time that I saw her, she had had a sore throat and a feeling of coming down with something. That's a phrase that Sharon likes to use, but it literally came out of her mouth. I feel like I'm coming down with something. She had had that feeling, on and off for the past month. And she'd had 1 day of low-grade fever, but otherwise not had a fever. She has had intermittent orbital headache and achy eyes, which she describes as postnasal drip, so feeling like phlegm is dripping down in her throat. A wheezy and tight chest with a feeling of restricted airflow and shortness of breath. Her breathing feels difficult at night. So it's particularly, I think, a postural thing. Like when she lies down, she feels like she can't breathe. And a hot water bottle feels good on her chest. She had purchased a pulse oximeter, and she started taking her pulse before she even got sick, or her readings on the machine. And she started out around 99 and dropped at one point to the high 90s. It's dropped a little bit, but it's still okay. She has a slight nasal discharge that is light in color with occasional small amount of blood. Her nose isn't clogged, and she can cough up a little phlegm. She had some diarrhea the previous week, but no nausea. She now has a stomach ache. She has some loss of sense of smell, and her appetite is diminished, and she's lost weight. She started out a little with a couple extra pounds, but not really overweight. She is thirsty and wakes in the morning thirsty and dry. Her urine is normal. Her energy is up and down. She has no sweating. She has some cold in her extremities. She has an achy body, especially in her hips, and she's not sure if exercise helps. Her sleep is mediocre. She wakes early or can have difficulty sleeping. Emotionally, she says she is, quote unquote, spinning out at night. I think that's because when she lies down, she feels like she can't breathe, and that's scary to her. Or she feels like she can't breathe easily. Her tongue has a thick, mostly white coat, although there's a tiny bit of yellow in spots where the coat is at its thickest. Again, I was seeing her tongue over video conference, which one of the things I've now learned in the past month is to have your patient take a tongue selfie and send it to you, because the picture quality in the video is not so great for the tongue. The tongue body is swollen, and there are dark and distended sublingual veins. So this was her formula. So it was a modified Chai Ping Tong. And she took the formula for 5 days and felt a lot better. Her breathing was easier, her headaches, body aches, stomach aches resolved, and her energy and sleep improved. And then what happened was what seems to frequently happen with patients with this virus is she felt, yay, I'm cured. I need to go out and run around. And she did that. And then she started feeling sick again. But the interesting thing was I think I then saw her again a couple days after she'd finished the formula. And she was talking about some of the symptoms coming back, but her tongue was normal. So all the tongue symptoms resolved, and she was still continuing to feel better, although she'd backslid significantly. And so then from there, we went off. We did like 3 other formulas after that. And I think she's on my to-do list to check in today. But, she had been doing a lot better. So that's what I got.
Sarah, thank you very much for taking the time and energy to put this together in your busy schedule. As you mentioned, your studies that are still going on. So thank you. Big appreciation.
Thank you.
Remind you guys, you can now sign up for the next one with Sharon. So if I go into, where are we here? May. So Sharon is doing one this Wednesday. That link is available now on the resource page. If you click here, you can sign up. Later today, we have May the 4th be with you. We have so it's a fun talk. We have Conscious Tuesday tomorrow. Check that one out with Jesse Shaw. And then on Friday, for those that are thinking of opening in May or June or have already opened, we've got Valerie Hobbs and Steve Shomo coming together to talk about guidelines and principles for opening your practice. They've been doing a lot of research and putting out material. So that's happening on Friday. And again, these are all free this week. So I think this one's really important for those that are starting to open up their practice, and how do you practice now with the COVID being part of our lives. So I want to let you know to check that out. And then next week, I'm doing a series. This is all through laurenbrown.com website. You can click on this link. I'm doing a whole series for 4 days, 2 hours a day, if you want to join that. Sarah, I want to thank you again very much for putting this together. And I want to thank Sharon for putting this team together. And I want to thank the tribe. I want to thank you guys for coming out and being here, being our community. And that's what this is all about.